Everyone, and welcome to Marketing in Your Strengths. And today we're going to talk about podcasting. And we're going to start with the idea of podcasting and our strengths, and then move to how to create an effective podcast plan. Now, if you would like to know more about how to create a podcast plan, I would suggest you go into our courses, and Shelly Brown has created some, as well as Tracy Wren, on podcasting and how to do that. So welcome. Anne is here. So good to see you again. I feel like I haven't been on for a while because I've been out of town. So it's good to see you. And Debbie Ashley, great to see you. And we are going to start. So the first thing that I wanted to do is really just address the different strength types that we talked about, the different personality types. And remember, we have 4. So we talked about the techie trendsetter, so someone who really uses technology and leverages that for their marketing. We have the persuasive presenter, and that's someone who uses speaking. We have the prolific penman, and that person is really highly gifted in writing, and that is one of their strengths. It's what energizes them. And then we have the community collaborator, and that's the person that brings everyone together to really promote and really meet the audience that has their message. Now, as we spoke, all of these personality types are probably innately somewhere within us because we recognize the need that we have to do some of these things in order to market our book well. But there are places that we land that we have a higher gifting. So let's talk just about podcasting for now. And so how would you go towards promoting your podcast or creating a podcast, or what content would you bring to a podcast? By the personality type that you are. So let's talk about the techie trendsetter. The techie trendsetter would be on a podcast, but I think the place that they would be gifted most is in leveraging the promotion of it. Because if you are a technological person, you're good at things like flashy designs, you're good at graphics, you can make shareable content, maybe you've mastered the platform of Instagram. Those platforms actually do create a space for you to talk about the things that you've been doing. And oftentimes we see when people are on a podcast, they will promote it on one of those platforms. So that is a great place for a person who has that ability to do. Now, we all have to do it, but I think that's the place that the techie trendsetter would really find their sweet spot. Then we have the persuasive presenter, and the persuasive presenter could really promote their podcast by doing things that are live or even at in-person events, and really say, bringing to their audience, like, for more information, you could go listen to this podcast, and having the opportunity to promote when they are speaking. They're also very visual, so they could do things that are on platforms or YouTube, or even in their email newsletter, creating videos that could be watched, where maybe they read a chapter from their book live, or something that really gets people interested in the message that they have, and then the ability to then promote the podcast that they are on from that, if you have spoken about your book or about your ministry or about the main point that you really are striving towards your mission. It's really just finding that place where promotion feels authentic and memorable. I think that really speaks to the persuasive presenter. Then you have the prolific penman, and this is where the audio version of the podcast could be really promoted through the written word. So you're able to speak to what is being presented in the podcast. Maybe you get a transcript and you kind of reformat it and reformat the information. Maybe you give more resources that are written in your podcast. As the person listens, they can click a download that will give them written resources that will continue to help promote your platform. And then the community collaborator. And this is where you will maybe invite people to be part of something during your podcast. So maybe you will do a book club. It could be virtual or in person, depending on the reach of your podcast and where the audience is for that. You can really focus on just things that are community driven, that build loyalty. You want that word of mouth buzz. You want to tell people who will tell people who will tell people, that draws the community in together. So thinking of how you can market your podcast in your strength. But as we think about podcasting, I'm just going to give you a few steps of how to build your platform reach towards a podcast. Now, you can create your own podcast, and I know there are people in our group that are doing that, and that is commendable. And perhaps you can pitch to them and be on their podcast, but really leveraging other people's audiences on their podcast is a simple way to get into it. And again, the courses on the course platform will help you with all the logistics, but let's just talk about the steps and where you need to go and really what personality type is going to be best at each one. So first we have identify your target audience. That's what we always do when we are talking about putting a new marketing promotion, a marketing idea of how we're going to get our ministry, our book out to the world. So when we identify who our audience is and the need that we can meet, we can then research and find suitable podcasts. Not every podcast is a good fit for you. And you may think of your personality type. If you are a prolific penman and maybe you're a little bit quiet and reserved, you may not want to be on a podcast where the host is loud and where there are maybe 2 or 3 hosts that are hosting it and they're all feeding you questions. You may want to be on a podcast that is more reserved, where the conversation is simple and it is not done in a bombastic way, where if you are the community collaborator, you may want the more people, the better. Like, let's have a podcast and everyone comes to the scene. So find a podcast that not only fits your message, but also fits the style of who you are and how you can present. Because if you're comfortable in presenting, you will have a much more effective podcast to share. Then you want to listen to the episodes, and that's how you discover, is this going to be a good fit for me? There are podcasts out there where the hosts are kind of loud, and there are podcasts where it's a very much more subdued. There are podcasts where you come and you tell your story and you give questions to the podcast person. There are some where they have a specific format that they want to follow. And so you need to kind of listen to a few and listen to more recent ones, because oftentimes the podcast will shift during the course of years or even months as they continue to promote produce their podcast. The next thing is craft a compelling pitch. Now, with a compelling pitch, this is a key, because if you don't have something that is compelling for the message that the podcaster is going to grab onto, they may not consider you as a guest. And also within the pitch, make sure that it's simple but engaging. Share your book's relevance to the podcast audience. Share and highlight some of the things that perhaps you really feel you can bring to their guests. And so that is, again, where your personality comes in. What can you bring to the table that will really, in your strengths, that will strengthen their own podcast and their reach? And don't forget, you always want to put a short author bio, but keep it concise and professional. Don't give them a whole story. I'm actually more impressed with people that give me a very short, concise bio than one that puts everything they've ever done from nuts to bolts, the beginning of time out there. Then you want to personalize your outreach. So this is where your personality comes into play. If you're a techie person, this may come with lots of bells and whistles, maybe even a little video clip of yourself. Whatever fits your personality, make sure you do it to the best of your ability. And this makes all the difference. When you address the host or producer by name, you don't want to do a generic email. You want to mention specific episodes that you've loved. Maybe say, when you had this guest on, I feel like I would be similar to that type of an interview, so they can kind of feel what your interview style would be. You want to show that you genuinely care about their work. And when you do, you're far more likely to capture their attention and get a yes. Then you can also use social proof. And so if you've been interviewed before, or you have some other features, you could give them a link so that they could hear your interview and hear what type of interviewee you are. That way they have the just the social proof. They can hear you in action and know whether or not you would be a good fit for them. Once you do that, you want to make sure you follow up. You don't want to be obnoxious and continually reach out. But if you don't hear back in a couple weeks, make sure that you do just respectfully follow up with an email or a phone call, or however you have been connecting with that person. This will really show that you are still interested. And also, as many of you, podcasters have busy inboxes as well. So sometimes things can get lost, overlooked, or just simply forgotten about. And so, you want to bring yourself up. Persistence, when it's done kindly, can show professionalism and enthusiasm. And it's two things that podcasters value most. Then make sure you come to the interview prepared. When you want to get booked, preparation is the key. So you want to familiarize yourself. If they've sent you questions, you want to make sure you go over them and make sure you have the answers written out, so that you're not reading, but you at least have thought through all of the answers so that you can speak to them intelligibly. You want to, you want to practice, and even practice out loud, maybe even get on a platform like Zoom and watch your interaction, because some podcasts are both video and audio. So if you are the techie trendsetter, or maybe the person who loves speaking in front of people, the presenter, that would be a great podcast for you, because you also get to be seen. And oftentimes those people have, the body language and the facial expressions that can bring people in. Whether if you're more reserved, you may want to make sure that you're not on a podcast that has a video to it. And so just really think through, like, where is my podcast going to be, and then prepare really well for that. Then you want to be engaging during the interview. So you want to show up with some excitement, with some energy, with authenticity. You want to be personal. You want to share what you have very naturally. Weave your book into the conversation without being overwhelming. You also want to actually talk with the interviewer. If you say something and they say something back to counteract or to add to what you have said, make sure you acknowledge their statements. Be engaging. Sometimes it's harder for us, those of us who would rather just kind of stay in our little office and write and not really have to do a lot of speaking. But this is where you kind of have to step into it and really prepare yourself so that you're able to really listen as you are doing the podcast, so you can engage. And then finally, after you have, I forgot to hit play. Sorry. So you're engaging during the interview. Then once you have had the interview, you want to express gratitude. And this can be done in a bunch of different ways, not only personally as you're on the screen together and just saying thank you and asking, how can I help get this out? Because not only do podcasters have you on their podcast to have a guest, but they also recognize the guest is going to help them leverage their podcast to the guest audience. So it plays both parts. You also want to make sure, let me go back. When you're researching podcasts, make sure it's a podcast that they actually have guests, because if they don't have a guest, then it's probably not a good podcast to actually outreach to. Forgot to say that. And then finally, once you've expressed gratitude personally, you can express gratitude through a written email, perhaps a written note, so that they know that you were, appreciative of the time that they took to interview you and promote you on their podcast. And then when the episode comes out, again, this is where your gifting is needed, because we need to promote. And oftentimes when you do a podcast, the podcaster will send you collateral items that you're able to use, whether they're reels or graphics or even verbiage for posts and for your email newsletter. But then think through, if you did a podcast on a specific topic and you are the person who speaks on the platform, then maybe you use that podcast as a resource for your audience. If you're writing a blog and you remember that that podcast speaks to the topic of your blog, use that podcast as a resource for that blog, a clickable link that you can put in there. So think through, how can I promote the podcast, but then how can I use it beyond just the day the podcast drops? How can I use it as a resource? And that will also help the podcaster out as they get continual interaction with the podcast in their circle. So that is what I have on podcasting. Those are the steps that you would take as you walk through each step of promoting podcasts and being on a podcast. Make sure you think of, how does my strength really fit in the marketing and the producing and the preparing for a podcast, and who would I choose that would fit my personality the best? And always remember, it's okay to go outside of the box, but if you're a first timer or you're just starting out, you may want to stay in your lane of your strengths so that when you're done, you end with the statement, I can't wait to do this again. So that is my teaching on podcasts and how to use your gifting, because I believe, and we would tell you this in the Bookmarking Pro Academy, that everyone needs to utilize podcasts to promote their book and share their ministry. So thank you, Anne and Shelley and Debbie and others that are watching, for joining me. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the Facebook group, or we can talk about it during the next coaching session. But we're going to do one more of these on Friday, where we will actually step in to another part of, let me see if I can find my notes. What's next? Oh, we talked about Facebook groups, but now we're going to talk about how we recognize to utilize our Facebook groups in our gifting. So what ways can we really market, promote, and bring value to our Facebook group in the gifting that we have? And so again, we will do that on Friday. Can't wait to talk to you all, and I will see you then. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.